over at BangTheBook.com, tons of great stuff going on. All of the remaining bowl games have picks and preview articles. 4 of them here today, 5 tomorrow, 4 on Saturday, 5 on Monday. And then, of course, once we know the matchup, we'll write up a preview for the national championship game as well. All Week 17 NFL games have been previewed. Power ratings articles, situational betting articles, all sorts of great informational stuff over there for you at BangTheBook.com. Sign up for those free contests as well. Just give us your email address. You can win cash prizes in those. Check out our sportsbook reviews as well. See if you can find one that works for you. DSI still dealing that BTB25 promo code with a $25 free bet just for signing up. 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook and 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. But check out the sportsbook reviews that we have over there. See what works best for you. And always remember that BangTheBook.com is your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. 2 guests coming your way here on today's program. The first, the great Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, brother?
Well, I don't know about great, but I appreciate the fabulous intro there, and hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas and enjoying the holiday season.
I got to say, there are a lot of people out there that follow me on Twitter that listen to the show, and they know that I like to subscribe to the shit-talking theory, which is basically you talk shit about something and the opposite happens. Kudos to you for employing that with Kansas State the other night.
Yeah, it's the old reverse psychology, and guys that have been longtime followers of me probably on Twitter, and I don't do it too often, but if you're looking for a trend, whenever I do that at a halftime or something of a game, chances are I usually come back and win that ticket. I would guess at least 2/3 of the time, if not more. And I think I even had a couple of Twitter guys hit me and say it's a 70% trend, and it has been over the last 4 or 5 years. But that was just frustration. UCLA up 17-7. I have a Kansas State minus 2.5 ticket. They close 6.5, and when you're beating the market by 4 points and you're down, still failing to cover by double digits at that time. That was a little bit of frustration there at halftime, but kudos to the Hall of Famer Bill Snyder. Made some adjustments. The interim coach for UCLA didn't, and it ended up being an easy winner.
All right, well, again, you don't want to overuse that, though. You don't want to let the magic run out. You want to save that for the spots where you really need it, and that was one of them. And for any of our listeners that hopped out in front of that line move, got that 2.5 that was out there, prior to the Josh Rosen announcement, that was something that we talked about on the show. So, again, maybe it wasn't a true position for you, but it made a lot of sense because if Josh Rosen came out and said he wasn't playing, that line was going to move. Well, move it did, and obviously it worked out in Kansas State's favor, who wound up covering the adjusted number anyway. But still, it was a savvy move that we talked about here on the show to get out in front of that adjustment, and kudos to anybody that hopped on that one. So we'll see what we're looking at here for these 9 bowl games that we're going to talk about today. Beginning on Saturday, game 257, 258, the TaxSlayer Bowl down in Jacksonville between Louisville and Mississippi State. Very, very interesting spot here for the Bulldogs. SEC team played very well against Alabama a couple of weeks ago, but no Nick Fitzgerald, no Dan Mullen. We saw a wave of action on this game at the Open where Louisville was -5, 6.5, 7 out there across the market. Brad, are you surprised that we haven't seen anyone else piggyback that initial move?
From a pure power ratings, I get why the line hasn't jumped anymore. I have nothing to hide. Louisville's probably one of the biggest bets I've had all season long. I was part of that initial move, and when the time comes, I'll post that ticket as we get closer to game time. I just think it's a terrible spot for Mississippi State, and not only Dan Mullen and the quarterback away, but they're also playing without both coordinators here. I liked how Louisville finished up the season. They were just 5-4. They won and covered their last 3 games. I think Lamar Jackson, obviously, and I think there might have been some holdout just to see if he would play or not. I think he's going to play. He's got something to prove, just like maybe Josh Allen for Wyoming. He's not getting all the love that a Josh Rosen or a Sam Darnold's getting. So actually one more data point, and him going out there and playing and having a good performance would be good for his draft stock. Big coaching mismatch. You got Petrino coaching in his 11th bowl game. They got an interim coach on the other side, Mississippi State, and Greg Knox. Lamar Jackson, to me, had just as good a season as what he had last year. The problem was he had a terrible bowl game. I think he's got a little bit of a revenge mode there. I just think Mississippi State playing without their best player and the entire coaching staff is really up against it here. I like Louisville, bet them at -5. Again, one of my bigger bets of the entire season. And, as long as you can still get a 6.5, shop around, you might have to lay the 115 to get it. I think it's still a really good play.
Yeah, and this is one of those where it's definitely important to have multiple sports books at your disposal. You've got some places that are 6.5 -15. You've got some that are 6.5 -18. A couple of books out there on the 7, including Bovada. So Louisville is a little bit of a public side here in this game, but that's not a big surprise at all because of the situations with Mississippi State, because you've got a big-time playmaker like Lamar Jackson. And this is even a larger scale example of what we talked about I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago on the show. Quarterbacks like Mike White, like Quentin Flowers, those senior guys that are going out there and playing their last games. And, for Lamar Jackson here, like you said, there's something for this kid to prove. There's something for him to go out there and do in this game, coming off of a Heisman Trophy season last year. I know he's not a senior, but he's going to make the jump to the NFL. He should. And you kind of wonder how he gets evaluated from this bowl game and from what he does in the combine. We know that NFL scouts love to fall in love with those measurables and those 40 times and all that type of stuff. Lamar Jackson's a big kid, a fast kid, a strong kid. I think a lot of people just don't expect what he did in college to translate to the NFL. A lot of people probably didn't expect that with Russell Wilson either. That's not to say Lamar Jackson's going to become Russell Wilson, but it is in his best interest to go out here, play a good game, show well in the combine. So, this is a guy with a lot to prove, and a lot of times the teams feed off of that as well.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And look, maybe he doesn't translate to the next level when it comes to the quarterback spot, but you're right. He's a big, lengthy kid. Shows great maneuverability, has a quick burst, has long legs. Him in different packages. I think. Look, I'm not selling him as a buying him as a first-round draft pick or anything like that. But he's the type of player you haven't heard with all the attention he's gotten over the last year and a half or so. He hasn't, pretty much kept his nose clean. You haven't heard any drama whatsoever with him. I thought he's handled the spotlight quite well. And again, I thought he improved in the passing game this year. Showed some improvement there. I don't think he has anything proved to come back for another season. So, he's a guy that's probably going to be drafted second, third round, but more of an athlete than a quarterback. And, I think because last year's bowl game against LSU was such a terrible performance, I think there's a little bit of a chip on their shoulder here. And I think they're actually motivated to finish this one outright, unlike what they did last year as they faltered down the stretch.
All right, let's go to the Liberty Bowl here, sponsored by AutoZone. Game 259-260. Iowa State takes on Memphis. Really, really intriguing game here. You've got an Iowa State team that, Ben Campbell's done a phenomenal job with them. They overachieved. They picked up a couple of really big wins this year, beating Oklahoma, beating TCU. Those are two signature hallmark wins for this program. I know they only went 7-5, but they had those two big scalps there. They have to go to Memphis, where the Tigers are virtually going to play a home game. Memphis, a 10-win team, a team that had a very, very good season. Mike Norvell signs an extension there with them. They fell short against Central Florida, but they've had a lot of time to let that loss kind of digest here. So Memphis is a 3.5, 4-point favorite, depending on where you look. You probably got 1.5 to 2 points here of home field advantage, maybe 2.5 if you really want to get aggressive with it. What do you think about this line? What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I lean with Iowa State here plus the points, and you used the word matchup, and I think that's the edge that Iowa State has here. They've already seen several high-powered Big 12 offenses shut them down. They only allowed 21 points per game, so the strength of the team is their defense. You can't say the same thing on the other side. Memphis, the number 120 total defense in the entire country. So I think matchup-wise, it kind of reminds me of Texas's defense against Missouri. Look, Missouri's offense performed quite well against SEC teams that weren't used to seeing it, but we saw Texas, a Big 12 team that sees that offense each and every week, and be able to shut down Missouri, and I think that might be the case again here. You also look, Iowa State 8-2-2 against the number. Even after they pulled that big outright upset against Oklahoma, they continue to be a little bit of a point spread darling there. And they don't turn the football over. They're the only team in the country that hasn't lost a fumble this entire season. Now, I hope I don't jinx them in that regard, but when you're taking care of the football, you're playing defense, that's usually a couple of good recipes to having some success, and them getting the hook here, I think, is the play. Cyclones plus 3.5 is the pick for me.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because you've got this Memphis team that, I mean, they put up numbers, and they did it on pretty much everybody. They scored 70 points twice in a game this season. Once against UConn, once against East Carolina. Say what you will about UConn and East Carolina, but if you can hang 70 on somebody, that's pretty damn impressive. Now, they do lose offensive coordinator Darryl Dickey to Texas A&M. I don't think that necessarily has too big of an impact here on this one, but you've got another guy here in Riley Ferguson who, you know, again, something to prove, wants to go out there, have a good game, show what he could do for the Scouts, a big kid at 6'4". So, you know, another guy that has something, something extra besides the bowl game, some additional motivation here. Same thing with wide receiver Anthony Miller as well, a guy with 92 catches this year. He needs 8 to get to 100. You know they'll look for him early and often. But what Matt Campbell has done with the Cyclones, I think, is so impressive. And now you've got a guy with a team that's buying in. And you know, if you had a middle-of-the-road Big 12 team, somebody else like a West Virginia or like a Texas Tech, something like that, and they're playing a team like Memphis, maybe it doesn't get them all that excited. But for Iowa State to go to a bowl game, have a chance to knock off a top 25 team in what amounts to virtually a road game, that means a lot more to this program than it would to other programs in that middle tier of the Big 12. So I think Iowa State is highly, highly motivated here too.
That's an excellent point, and a great comparison. You're exactly right. Had it been other middling Power 5 teams, I think Memphis would have been the play. They're going to be excited playing in front of their home crowd, and they've done quite well in front of their home crowd this year. First time that they've ever finished a season perfect straight up at home, and the Liberty Bowl's been around a while, since 1960. So but I just think Iowa State, first bowl game for them in 5 or 6 years. They'll be excited to be there. They'll bring a large contingent of fans. And I think another thing I didn't emphasize here, Memphis, I would not award them the full home field, even though they're playing in front of their home stadium. It's not like they'll have an overwhelming crowd support here. I bet Iowa State will have quite a large contingent of fans in the crowd. So that's one where maybe Memphis normally gets a 3.5 home field advantage. You're exactly right. 2.5 is what you should award it. And I'm not necessarily sure that the market's properly accounting for that. So a highly motivated team with a better defense that takes care of the football sounds like a good recipe for me. And I'd probably shade in a little bit of the money line here on the Cyclones.
All right, let's go out to Glendale for the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl game, 261-262, Washington and Penn State. This has the chance to be a pretty good game here. Penn State favored by 1.5 or 2 points, depending on where you look. Bovada, the highest line out there at 3, so it certainly looks like Penn State. The public side here in this one, haven't seen a whole lot of sharp involvement on either side in this game. Brad, what do you think about this one?
I think the sharps are going to be on Washington here because, the public side definitely Penn State, and, the line's creeping down, and it hasn't had, any want to go to full 3 here, and it's come down to like 1.5, and some of your Pinnacle's dealing a 1.5 with reduced juice here. So I do think the sharper side's Washington. Two very similar teams. You start breaking down both that have really good defenses. Both teams, had season win totals right around 10. They met those expectations. They came up just short, losing a couple of close road games, each of them. And the issue I have with back in Washington, they only played 2 bowl teams away from home. They lost both games outright to Arizona State. Stanford failed to cover the spread by 38 points in those 2 games. On the flip side, I got a little bit of concern with the fact that Joe Moorhead's gone for Penn State. And I think people forget James Franklin was on the hot seat last year. He made a great hire in Joe Moorhead. Once that offense got going the middle of last season, they haven't looked back. But with him off to Mississippi State, I'm a little bit concerned. But then again, Washington also lost their offense coordinator, Jonathan Smith, to Oregon State. Both teams top-notch defenses. Washington's number 1 in the country in rush defense. A tough call for me, but I just think Penn State's got the better playmakers here. I'm leaning with the Nittany Lions minus the points, but it's definitely not a game where I'm going to get too heavily involved in.
That Moorhead angle is something that I'm really glad you pointed out, because if you didn't do it, I was going to do it. Like you said, James Franklin was on the hot seat. This is a guy that very well could be coaching somewhere else right now if he hadn't made that hire of Joe Moorhead. And I've talked about this before on the show. I've liked what I've heard from James Franklin. I heard an interview on XM from him over the summer talking about, the Moorhead hire and about how he handles his program. And then I mentioned right here on the show, about the game against Ohio State where Penn State's in control. Guy takes a dumb 15-yarder for a late hit. Franklin sits him down, talks to him man-to-man as opposed to embarrassing him. I think Franklin is good in that respect. I think he's going to have his team focused and ready to go. The problem is, I don't know how good of a head coach this guy is. I think he's okay on the defensive side, but offensively, Penn State was a train wreck until Joe Moorhead showed up. Now, they won't change too much, obviously, with Moorhead gone, but I'd worry a lot about Penn State next year, not just because they're going to lose Saquon Barkley and all the talent and some of the talented wide receivers that they have, but because I just don't know what kind of coach this guy is. On the other side, I know exactly what kind of coach Chris Peterson is, and that's a really damn good one. So I think a coaching advantage probably goes to Washington here, but I agree with you that I think from a talent standpoint, especially with Washington's injury problems, Penn State is the more talented team. So I guess this is kind of a matchup of, do you prefer the coach or do you prefer the player personnel? And then you kind of apply your thoughts that way.
Yeah, and boy, as we talk through it here, with both teams losing their offense corners, both teams having solid defenses, and this is why I like doing shows and breaking down games. I can kind of, be thinking about it analytically and just, talking through my handicap here. I forget Penn State for me, and I still lean with them a little bit here, but as we do this, I'm leaning more towards the under. Obviously, you also have both teams that haven't played since the last week of November, and as you get later in bowl season, a lot of times the offenses, when it comes to timing, and that with offenses in college football, the later bowl games tend to go under. The early ones, they tend to go over. I'm leaning more towards the under here now at 55. If I'm going to get involved right now, I'm going to go under the total. But you broke it down. Coaching edge is the Chris Peterson here. But, how much when it comes to just one game, I don't know necessarily if it's going to really show up for Penn State. The guy that they promoted to offensive coordinator has been on staff. So, and obviously they got a veteran group there with Barkley and McSorley. If it's going to really show up, it's going to be at the start of next year. And you're exactly right. As I start to look at 2018, Penn State is definitely a team I've circled and a team that I want to fade and sell next year.
All right, let's move on to the Orange Bowl here, the Capital One Orange Bowl down in Miami. So the Hurricanes obviously don't really have very far to go for this one. They take on Wisconsin. This number now Wisconsin minus 4.5. And I got to admit here, Brad, I am kicking myself very hard this morning with the holidays, with everything else going on. Maybe haven't been paying as much attention to the odds screen as I should. I wish I had picked up on this one at 6 or 6.5 where it opened. Now that it's down to 4.5, I like it quite a bit less. But this is one of those games to me where maybe Wisconsin does win the game, and maybe Wisconsin looks dominant, and the doubters of the Miami Hurricanes are validated. But I just don't see a Wisconsin team capable of going out there to Miami and winning this game comfortably.
I completely agree. And if you're a subscriber to my newsletter, you'll see that I got involved on Miami. I got a +7 ticket from down at the Tropicana, and the money, and that was definitely pro money that showed up, especially 3-4 days prior out to the game, showed up on Miami. Correct line movement there. I like the matchup here for the Hurricanes. Look, I'm not even giving them close to home field advantage. It wouldn't be a bit surprised to me to see a 50-50 crowd split in this one, but you got to award a couple points the fact that they're sleeping at home, and they're very familiar with the setting there. Wisconsin's making their first ever appearance to the Orange Bowl, and obviously South Beach and everything down there can offer up a little bit of distractions. Mark Richt, whether you like him or you don't, he's actually one of the better bowl coaches. You see a lot of bowl coaches. Heck, even Nick Saban's barely above 500 when it comes to bowl games. Mark Richt's 10-5 straight up, 9-6 against the number. I like buying them because they're at their lowest point of the season off a couple of losses. The matchup that I really like is Alex Hornibrook of Wisconsin. His propensity to throw interceptions, 15 of them this year against that ball-hawking Miami, Florida defense with the turnover chain. Forcing the second most turnovers in the country this year. I think that's a bad spot for Wisconsin. I think Miami's speed on the defensive side of the ball, particularly the front seven there, is a good matchup against Wisconsin's offense. We saw Wisconsin struggle with the speed of Ohio State. So, I still think that at 4.5, I still think Miami's a solid bet. Obviously, 6.5, 7 was much preferred, but I don't think Wisconsin's capable of getting separation here. Hurricanes one of my favorite bowl picks of the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, I'd still even play this one at 4.5, and I'd also sprinkle the money line here for this game as well. I mean, this is something we talked about with Wisconsin throughout the year, and it was really hard to power rate Wisconsin because you had to have them high. You had to put them in a position where their lines reflected what you were going to see in the market because they played a terrible schedule. You look at Iowa, who they beat 38-14, one of their 3 games against the top 25 opponent this year. Iowa just had 200 yards against Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl. Now, they won the game, but they looked putrid on offense. Michigan, we know that they're not a particularly good offense either, and Wisconsin won that game 24-10. Played right with Ohio State, but Ohio State's kind of got that knack here over the last couple of years of really not playing up to its ceiling, and they certainly didn't do that in the Big Ten championship game either. Not to take anything away from Wisconsin, who played very well in that game, but Ohio State with some J.T. Barrett missed throws away from turning that thing into a complete runaway. So I'm just not impressed with Wisconsin's body of work at all. I know they went 12-1. Yeah, they beat Florida Atlantic early on in the year when Florida Atlantic wasn't quite the Owls team that we came to know. Yeah, they beat Northwestern at home. They beat Purdue, who just beat Arizona in the Foster Farms Bowl. That's all great, but they're taking on a legitimate top 5 team now with a top 10 defense. I don't see how Wisconsin's able to have too much success in this game. And Mark Richt has a massive coaching advantage here too.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Wisconsin's paper tiger schedule, double-digit favorite, 11 of their 12 regular season games. You mentioned the Iowa game. That was a good spot for them. They're catching Iowa off. It is a massive upset over Ohio State, or at least close in there where Iowa was a little bit of flat there. The Michigan game, Michigan was outplaying Wisconsin. Brandon Peters gets hurt in that game, and Michigan was dead in the water. Michigan might have beaten them outright had Peters not gotten hurt in that game, and you're exactly right. Ohio State, J.T. Barrett can just make a couple of throws. That's a double-digit loss for Wisconsin. And, on the flip side, Miami, look, I haven't loved from them, and they, statistically aren't a dominant team. But if there's 2 games where they really stepped up, both games at home, both prime time, that was against Virginia Tech and Notre Dame where they really showed their ceiling there. They have a higher ceiling. If they play their A game, you're exactly right. Forget the plus 4.5. You're going to have to, put a little bit and shade a little and sprinkle a little bit of money line on Miami because that wouldn't be stunned if they just won the game outright.
All right, let's go to New Year's Day here as we kick off 2018 with South Carolina taking on Michigan in the Outback Bowl. Gamecocks catching 7.5 here against a Michigan team that didn't really live up to expectations and really hasn't during the Harbaugh tenure. What do you think about this line and this number?
Yeah, I'm not going to get too involved here, but, if you're just looking at the total here, and it's a very low number sitting at 43, it's tough to lay more than a touchdown here. I guess the dynamic that I'm not fully grasping is how much is Brandon Peters worth, because Michigan was a better football team with him behind center. He didn't turn the football over through 0 picks, had 4 touchdowns. John O'Korn was a mess, 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. South Carolina appropriately fired their offense coordinator after the season, but they're going against the number 3 defense in the country. That's not ideal. South Carolina 6-1 against the spread as an underdog this year, 4 outright upsets. Boy, Michigan only had 1 win over a bowl team all year. I really wanted to fade both teams in bowl season so far. I'm not going to get too heavily involved with, but if you're looking for a lean for me, I'm leaning with South Carolina plus the 7.5, getting the extra touchdown. But man, if Peters is healthy and he's the difference in that Michigan offense, I could be sitting on a losing ticket there.
I think the firing of Kurt Roper was the best thing to happen to the South Carolina program since Steve Spurrier stepped down. And I love Steve Spurrier. I mean, he's my Twitter avatar for a reason. But the guy he wasn't getting it done from a recruiting standpoint anymore. I have some friends down in South Carolina. They're in the athletic department. I've heard some things about him, just skipping out on recruit visits and all that type of thing that really hurt, some of the players that the program was able to get. Now you've got Will Muschamp there, who's a brilliant defensive mind. I was absolutely fascinated by him when I watched him on the coach's film room for the college football playoff national championship game a couple of years ago. I think this team's going to be ready to play defensively, especially after what happened in last year's Birmingham Bowl against South Florida, which just became a massive shootout. The great unknown here is that Brian McClendon, the interim offensive coordinator, still has a chance at the job. Now, he probably won't get it, but he's auditioning for it here in this game. So what does he do? You've got a mobile quarterback in Jake Bentley, a guy I've likened to Connor Shaw with more arm talent. You've got a guy that can move around a little bit. Maybe that helps against a good Michigan defense. But South Carolina just doesn't have skill position talent right now. That's something that they really need to find a way to build up. So I don't know how much success they have. I think Muschamp's defense is ready to go. Low total, but I'd have to look at the under here. And then by proxy, I'd have to look at catching 7.5 with South Carolina. Because if this is a low-scoring game, then certainly you'd want to take the points in that situation.
Yeah, and I never am wanting to propose teasers in college football. I think it's a losing measure just because there's higher variance, and there's particularly much higher variance when it comes to bowl games. We've seen that definitely this bowl season so far. And I'm not saying, a bigger ticket on January 1st, but if you got to get involved, I think, a teaser on the under in South Carolina is not a bad way to go because this is one where I don't particularly see a lot of high variance. I expect a lower scoring game, and I expect, but if there's two units that are going to show up here without any question marks, it is the South Carolina defense and it is the Michigan defense. So I could see a teaser on South Carolina, and the under is probably what I'll end up betting on the game. Not one of my bigger bets, but I'm a college football junkie, and I have a little degenerate in me when it comes to gambling these bowl games. That's what I'll end up playing in that one.
I'm not a teaser guy in college football either, but when you look at this Saturday through Monday slate, Louisville down around to Pick'em, Miami over 10 at 10.5, and then maybe a South Carolina, Michigan under, or South Carolina up to 13.5 or 14. Maybe not the worst look in the world. Again, I don't love teasers. When you're talking about games that have some lower totals here, you can do some things like that, and maybe that is something that does wind up having a little bit of success. Again, it's not the optimal way to play it by any means because college football is a higher variance league than the NFL, but you do have some options out there if you are a little bit worried, about laying some of the straight numbers that are out there. All right, let's go to the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. This is a fascinating game. Central Florida takes on Auburn. We all know Scott Frost moving on after this game, but he has been given the opportunity to round out the perfect season for Central Florida. Auburn had a chance to get to the college football playoff by beating Georgia. Couldn't do it. They find themselves in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl here against a group of 5 team. A very good one, but still a group of 5 team. They're favored by 9.5 or 10. What do you think about this one, Brad?
Well, it all comes down to motivation. I think Central Florida will have it. I think they're super excited about Scott Frost continuing to coach the game. And you even see players from other programs respecting that Scott Frost is staying on to coach the game. Now, he's had to split up his time, and that is a negative, the fact that he hasn't put 100% full effort into the game planning. He's had to recruit with an early signing period for Nebraska, but I think motivation-wise, Central Florida couldn't be more thrilled. Fan base is thrilled. They sold out of their ticket allotment almost immediately. On the flip side, how excited is Auburn? They just got done playing in this stadium for the SEC championship game, one game short of making the college football playoff. And you look at how these group of 5 teams, and you count the former Big East Conference, how they played in major bowls here. The last 19 times, the group of 5 schools have gone 13-6 straight up, despite being an underdog in 16 of those games. And obviously included in one of those was Central Florida's huge upset win over Baylor in the Fiesta Bowl. Man, I'm going to wait for and see if I can get a 10 out here, but I'm definitely leaning with Central Florida plus the points.
That is the big question for Auburn is, how motivated are they? How excited are they to go out and play this game? Now, one of the things that I think could be an interesting side note to this one, when you look at the college football playoff, you look at the ranking system and, I know that the top 25 doesn't necessarily mean anything, but that preseason perception is very important for you when it comes to the college football playoff committee because it buys you some mistakes. If you're a top 5 or top 10 team coming into the season, you trip up early on or you trip up in the middle of the year, people are still going to remember, well, this is a team that was supposed to do great things. They have a high ceiling. Maybe they look in a little bit more favorable of a light as that committee starts talking. For Auburn here, normally a loss to a group of 5 team would really be detrimental to you coming into the following season from a preseason standpoint. But Central Florida's a top 10 team here. So it kind of makes me wonder, if Auburn doesn't win this game, and they certainly may not, how far does perception actually fall in a year where Central Florida was a 12-0 team, was, a high-scoring team, a high-flying team, the teams that people like to write stories about? How much does this hurt Auburn to actually lose this game? Is that a consideration going forward? Does it matter to the players? I don't know. But that is something that I try to look at here when you've got these Power 5 versus Group of 5 games, is that's kind of an element of motivation as well.
It is, and I'm glad you're bringing this up. As we transition, we're wrapping up the season here. There's one thing that people overreact to in the marketplace. It's bowl games, because that's the lasting impression that you have of that particular team. And if I'm looking to buy Auburn, and I kind of am, to be honest with you, I think Stidham is, I probably bought into him 1 year too early. But I wouldn't mind catching some extra value on Auburn in the marketplace, whether it be the futures or the season win totals, them losing this game. So I don't think it hurts them like a typical, game would against a Group of 5 team, because Central Florida's getting all this press. You're exactly right there. But it'll definitely hurt them a little bit in the marketplace, just because the public overreacts to what they just saw last. So I'm glad you're bringing that up. And as we, talk some and do some off-season podcasts and all that, I think that's one of the points you're going to hear me drive home is, don't overreact to what you saw in the bowl game, especially with bowl games being higher variance. And a lot of times bowl games offering up teams that aren't motivated to be there. It's not necessarily a true reflection of what that team was all about the entire season.
All right, we'll move on to the Citrus Bowl here, a game that we can probably spend just a couple of seconds on, because you played LSU at the 2.5. You wanted to get out there in front of the key number. Now we're sitting on 3 with extra juice pretty much across the market. Matchbook, the exchange, which is one of the sharper offshores out there, already dealing 3.5. Nobody else has gotten to that point yet, but it certainly looks like we will be soon enough. Has anything changed your mind at all about this game that's happened, over the last few weeks?
What last night's news changed the little things for me. I'm a little bit worried about LSU's frame of mind on offense, because it looks like they're going to part ways with their offense coordinator, Matt Canada, after the season. That news broke last night that he's going to be gone after the bowl game. That affects it, because I kind of hark back to LSU Notre Dame from 3 years ago, where John Chavis had 1 foot out the door, was leaving to go to Texas A&M, and Notre Dame's offense really took advantage of a pretty good LSU defense. So that's a concern that I have right now, and I might actually, if it goes to 3.5, play back a little bit Notre Dame. But here's what I do know about Notre Dame. Number one, they struggle to throw the football, and they're missing 3 of their top 4 wide receivers, and some significant strong trends here. I am very familiar with the Notre Dame program growing up a fan. They haven't won a New Year's Day bowl game since January 94. They're 0-9 straight up, 1-8 against the number. Away from home against top 20 teams, they're 0-10 straight up, 3-7 against the number. And Brian Kelly is a terrible bowl coach, 2-7 against the number. Don't need to say anything more. Very happy with my 2.5 ticket, although a little bit concerned there if an LSU offense is a little bit distracted with an outgoing offensive coordinator.
That's an excellent point there with Matt Canada, who was the highest paid offensive coordinator in college football. Didn't get along with Ed Orgeron. You have to wonder if LSU, wishes that they had a do-over with the Orgeron hire. That's something that we can talk about over the offseason here and sort of speculate on that. But Matt Canada will coach the bowl game, but he is on his way out the door. So, like you said, that is a pretty big consideration there with that one. All right, let's go to game 271, 272 here. This one is the Rose Bowl College Football Playoff semifinal. Georgia takes on Oklahoma. This number is anywhere from Georgia -1.5 to Georgia -2.5 out there. If you remember way back when this number opened, Oklahoma was a short favorite. That didn't last very long, but we haven't gotten all the way up to 3 yet. So, Brad, what do you think about this one?
I don't agree with the line move here and all the money on Georgia. I just think Oklahoma's got the more experience as far as playoffs. They were in it a couple of years ago. I know Riley, Lincoln Riley is coaching his first bowl game, so it'll be interesting to see how he preps his team with an extra month to prepare. But from all indicators, I mean, Lincoln Riley is going to be a future superstar when it comes to the coaching ranks. I have a significant edge at quarterback here with experienced Baker Mayfield and against a true freshman in Jake Fromm. And look, I think what gets overplayed, it was a significant trend in the 90s and the early part of the 2000s is, always fade the Heisman Trophy winner. And I guess there was some affirmation last year with Lamar Jackson having a bad bowl game. But that trend just hasn't been and hasn't held true here the last 10 bowl games if you look through that. So I think there's a little bit of overreaction there. I'm worried about the matchup as far as Georgia having not seen a particular offense like Oklahoma almost all year. I mean, they really benefited from a very weak SEC East this year. We saw that with Missouri going down to a Big 12 team. I'm leaning with Oklahoma, and I'm betting Oklahoma on the money line here. And Oklahoma has been one of those rare teams that has had a lot of success against SEC teams. 4-0 straight up and against the spread. Bowl wins over Alabama. Bowl win over Auburn last year. I think the Sooners are a very confident team with the experience edge. Give me them plus the points and on the money line.
This may be a simplistic point of view for me, but when you look at the line moves here in both of these games, Alabama up to 3, some shops now dealing extra juice on the Crimson Tide as well. This move here with Georgia going up, is that SEC bias still out there? And if so, I mean, does the conference deserve it anymore, given what some of the other conferences have been able to do with their top teams?
I don't think they deserve it off of what I've seen this year. I mean, the conference is not what it was 5-10 years ago. It just isn't. And particularly the coaching's not there. I mean, Urban Meyer's gone, James Franklin's gone, Mark Richt's gone, even Les Miles to a lesser extent is gone. I think Kirby Smart's a future superstar, but I'm not seeing it and I'm not buying it. And we'll see. I mean, the problem is right now as we're taping this, we haven't seen too many SEC teams play. Well, we'll definitely see that, and that's something to take into consideration as we lead up to it, and we see a lot more Power 5 teams playing bowl games. You see it in the marketplace. If a conference starts looking a little bit weak, and we saw that with the MAC, I mean, those lines are going to move either for them or against them, and that'll be something I'll like to look at as the SEC and Big 12 play a lot more bowl games. If one or the other is looking really strong, then maybe I can understand the line moves, but if the SEC's not looking – it's all, powerful self, then I really, can't explain either line move here in the semifinals.
All right, one more game to talk about here on the board. That is Alabama-Clemson, All-State Sugar Bowl. Third meeting for these two teams. The first two games have been absolutely fantastic. I would expect nothing less here in this one. Alabama, 3-point favorite. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I like Oklahoma as my favorite side or total right now in the playoff semifinals. But if I'm going to lean, and I'm not going to have a big bet, I'm going to take Clemson plus the 3. Number one, I don't think there's a coaching mismatch here. And let's talk about the Alabama coaching staff and what's happened to it here the last couple of years. You lose a guy like Kirby Smart a couple of years ago, one of the better defensive coordinators in college football. Okay, you replace him with Jeremy Pruitt, who I thought was a slight notch down, although I do really like Jeremy Pruitt. But Jeremy Pruitt's also splitting time right now between this defense coordinator job and the Tennessee job, so that's a negative. You lose one of the better offensive play callers in all of college football in Lane Kiffin. I think it's a step down in Brian Dabble so far, what we've seen this year. You also lose, Steve Sarkisian was an offensive quality control analyst on this staff last year. He's now the offense coordinator for the Falcons. You lose Mario Cristobal on the offensive line, so I don't think that this huge coaching edge for Alabama, not just at the head coaching but also at the assistant level, just isn't there. Dabo Swinney, the last 5 years, has had one of the more remarkable postseason runs in the history of college football. 7 times. He's 7-0 against the spread, 6-1 straight up, all in the underdog role, 2 covers against Nick Saban. I got the best unit on the field, in my opinion, the Clemson defensive line. I got a Clemson team that handled their business quite well, the defending champ this year. I mean, if Kelly Bryant isn't on a gimpy leg and missing the second half of the Syracuse game, Clemson goes unbeaten. So I know the revenge factor is getting played up, and I know the sharp money is on Alabama here, but now I'm catching a full field goal. I like the Tigers plus the points.
Here's my hook, and I get everything you say makes a lot of sense. I love Dabo Swinney. I hate saying that as a Gamecocks fan, but the dude's just awesome, not just as a coach, but also as a person, and he's done phenomenal things with this Clemson team. In the 2 meetings that Clemson has played against Alabama, Deshaun Watson, when they won last year, 36 of 56, 420 yards, 3 touchdowns. When they lost, 30 of 47, 405 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. Kelly Bryant doesn't have that dynamic. He cannot throw the way that Deshaun Watson can on this Alabama defense. That's the biggest difference between the previous 2 meetings as far as I'm concerned. So while I love Dabo Swinney, I think Brent Venables does a hell of a job. I think Clemson, obviously is here to stay. I mean, you look at the recruiting classes they've had over the last few years, the defenses that they've had. This is a legitimate titan in college football. The problem is the way they've moved the ball on Alabama the last 2 years has been to throw it. I don't think Kelly Bryant can do that. Maybe he can. Maybe I'm proven wrong. But I think that's why Alabama advances. But it's not something I love putting my money on. This is a game that I'd almost rather watch without any kind of financial investment or maybe look to do some in-game trading. But this is one that I just want to watch and enjoy, and I think that we should get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, again, I'm not going to have a big bet, and you're exactly right. If you're wanting to back Clemson, your biggest question, Kelly Bryant, he's going to have to throw the football because if he can't, you're dead in the water if you have a Clemson ticket. And that's why, in-game live betting offers up some unique opportunities where you can see how he's handling himself. And, 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, not going to move the needle when Deshaun Watson, previous couple of years had more than 30 touchdown passes entering that game. So you're exactly right. That's the one that gives me pause. And obviously the money being on Alabama also gives me a little bit of pause there. But should be a great one. Should have 2 great semifinals. We haven't necessarily seen great semifinals so far outside of the Alabama-Ohio State game a few years ago. They've all been blowouts. So from a fan aspect, I'm hoping just for a couple of competitive games on New Year's Day.
Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. What's going on over at the website right now, man?
Yeah, BradPowersSports.com. If you want to check out the newsletter, which we talk about each and every week here, you can get the rest of the season for $30. Not only the rest of the college bowl actions, where I give a star-rated play on every single game and a complete extended bowl write-up on every single game. You see what I bet in each particular bowl game. But also, you got last week of the NFL. You got the entire NFL playoffs. You want to get it emailed to you each and every week. It's just $30 all the way through the Super Bowl. $30 for the Powers Picks newsletter. Go to BradPowersSports.com.
And you can follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. Brad, thank you so much for joining us, man. Happy New Year, buddy, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds good. Take care, my friend.